in my edition, it's the fifth halacha. We talked about before how there's a prohibition to offer sacrifice outside the temple. And certain things you get hit with the punishment, and certain things you don't get hit with the punishment. It's all forbidden. The question is, hit with the Isser Karis or not? Let's say a person just burns an entire animal as a burnt offering. Really? So he's chayav. Why? Because there are emurim there. That could have been emurim are the entrails. The entrails of the sacrifice are what's burned on the altar. Because that had been burnt, that would have been burned on the actual altar in the temple. So burning an animal on a backyard altar, your own private altar outside the temple, will also give you an isser. And even though he didn't separate the entrails, man, Peter's going crazy. He keeps losing internet and reconnecting. Okay. Ein bisar hazevach hoseitz. You can't say that the meat of this zevach, which is not supposed to be burned, or ideally, if it had been a korban, this would have been eaten by the kohanim, by people, right? So it's getting in the way of the entrails of this animal being burned on the altar, where you're doing it outside the temple. So you don't say that. It's as though the entrails, forbidden fats and everything, are being burned on the altar on their own. It's as though they've been cut out and put onto the fire. You do this, you offer this animal on your own backyard altar, here with the prohibition. Does that make any sense? Yeah, I think it does make sense. Let's say a person were to burn a meal offering on his own altar, and he didn't do kmitza to it. Patur. Why? Because the kometz is what's supposed to be burned on the altar in the temple. If it was in the temple, the kometz that's just a handful of flour. But the kometz, in order to exist, has to have been actually taken and separated. In this case, she'ena kometz barur muvdal. When he burns the meal offering as it is on his own altar, the kometz is still in there. It hasn't been, I guess, differentiated. Okay. Kimitzah, but if he did do this to his meal offering outside the temple, he took out the handful of flour that's supposed to be burned on the altar, and then somehow the kometz made its way back into the rest of the meal offering. It fell back in. And then he burned this entire meal offering outside of his altar, outside the temple. It is chayav. Now he'd be hit with the penalty for offering sacrifice outside. Okay, hayotzek l'habalel. This is the seventh or the sixth halach according to whichever edition you have. Yotzek means a person who pours the oil onto the meal offering. Habalel is the person who mixes the flour and the oil. Hapotate, that's the person who takes the baked offering and then breaks it up into pieces. Hatoto pitin. They would bake, let's say a rakik is like a flatbread, soft, spongy flatbread. They'd bake and they'd fold it over and bake it into pieces. You see the pictures? So hamoleach means a person who salts the offering. Was every single offering burnt in the altar in the temple had to be burned, had to be salted. Okay, I don't know what to do with this notification. It keeps popping up. V'amenif, a person who waves the offering, because meal offerings were waved. The ceremony. V'amagish, he officially brings it to the kohen. Here's the meal offering. Okay, v'amasader shulchan. The person who sets the table. What are we talking about? The only table in the temple was the shulchan, which had the showbread on it. Okay. The Rambam says meitivin ani wrote isn't like everybody else says. Everybody says means prepare the wicks and the oil for lighting. The Rambam says the actual lighting. V'akometz, a person who takes out the komets from the meal offering. V'amakabel damin, someone who receives the blood from slaughter. V'achutz, and all these were done outside the temple. Patur. Every one of these services was done in the temple. So if a person does it outside the temple on his own backyard altar, he would not be punished, even though it's forbidden. Why? Aren't these all essential parts of the temple service? And the answer is, every one of these acts is not a final act. It's not a complete act. For example, meitiv the neirot, then you have to, I guess, there's a thing that they do when they light it. Actually, I want to look up something here. I made a chart here that explains it. Why isn't it Lakat Neros Hihat of Matan? Yeah. So why is it not the final act? I don't know. I knew this before and I forgot why. It says it has to be a final act. We saw this in Bias Mikdash, by the way. The Kohen's only hit, when the Kohen Balmum, right? he has to do a final act. So the final act is not receiving the blood. What's the final act? Applying the blood, right, to the altar, or spilling the blood. So all these things, the kometz, taking out the handful of flour, has to be followed with putting that handful of flour into a vessel and putting that onto the fire. So all these are followed by something. It's not the ultimate act you do with it. When you do all these things it says at the beginning with the meal offering, the last thing you do is burn it or eat it. Right? So none of these are final. Ma ha'alaya shehi gamar avodah. Just like actually burning the sacrifice on the altar, that's it. That's the ultimate final act, letting it burn. Af kolshu gamar avodah chayavin alav. So too, anything that's gamar avodah chayavin alav, like slaughtering. Once you slaughter the animal, it's dead. Right?
We could say, well, the salting, salting well and finish the salting.
No, but salting isn't. No, salting is just a prerequisite for burning.
Slaughtering is a prerequisite too.
No, slaughtering is not, because slaughtering is its own thing. That's why it's you don't even need a kohen for it. Okay. Okay. Next, paraduma, the red heifer. Is that a korban, by the way? It's called the chatos in one place, but it has nothing to do with sacrifice, right? And but tell you that it's not done in the temple. There's no yeah, so it's not a temple sacrifice. Okay. Paraduma shesrafa chutz mimakom srifata. Let's say burn the paraduma outside of its place, wherever it's supposed to be on, like you said, Mount of Olives, but they didn't, I don't know, on the other side, the north side, Mount Scopus. Like we said before, the scapegoat that's supposed to go to Azazel, and it's already been confessed upon. Okay, so it's after Agrella, after confession. Even according to the Ravad, this would be the case. He slaughters this guy as an offering outside the temple. Patur, also exempt. Why? When it talks about the prohibition, it talks about that this sacrifice had not been brought to the temple like it's supposed to the entrance of the tent of meeting. If you're dealing with something that's not fit to be brought to the Ol Moed as a sacrifice, so there's no punishment for offering it as sacrifice elsewhere. So the paraduma is not to be brought to the Azara and sacrificed. It's meant to be outside the temple and processed into ashes, so that you can use it for sprinkling. And the scapegoat's meant to be thrown off a cliff, so it's not meant as a sacrifice. So if a person were to, I guess, jump the ish iti, hijack his goat and run, I guess he tackles him, steals a goat and makes it get away, and then brings it to his own altar on Yom Kippur and slaughters it there. He wouldn't be hit with the chiyuv hares because he slaughtered as sacrifice something that's not fit for sacrifice. Okay. Let's say kochim psulim, they've been disqualified. They became disqualified when they were in the temple courtyard in the kodesh already. If he takes those and makes them into sacrifice outside of the temple, now he's hit with an obligation. Kitzat. Let's give an example. Kigon halon vayotseva tameh. Sacrifice that was left over. It had been almost fully processed, but just they forgot to burn on the altar. They left the limbs lying around the temple courtyard. Vayotse, or they, instead of the Kohanim marching up to the altar with the pieces of this animal, they marched out the door. Second, they move it outside the Azara. It's been disqualified. Vatame, or got contaminated. Okay, somehow or other, a bird was flying around the temple courtyard and dropped a dead mouse. Okay, contaminating things, dead lizard. Or it was disqualified by the wrong thoughts of the Kohen. Yeah, we're going to see those soon. The Kohen has thoughts of pigul in his mind, so he disqualifies the korban. Shekulan nisrafin. All these sacrifices are to be taken out of the temple. They disqualified in the temple, so they're to be burnt. The Moshe Ba'er Belchot Psulei Muktashim. Imavar ve'Allah behen b'chutz. If he took any of these and offered them outside the temple, chayav. Why? Shnemar lasot oto laHashem. Says to make these for God. Kol na'aseh or na'asa. You have in your printed edition na'aseh with a present tense. No, it should be na'asa with a kamat. Everything that was done for Hashem, chayvin love. Ve'elu na'asu laHashem, and these were done. See, na'asu is past tense, not na'asim present tense. So yeah, I'm surprised that Makbili and Korean got the Nikud wrong on this sin over here. It should be kamatz. In the nifal, normally the difference between nifal, masculine singular, is usually in the third person in the past tense, is just a kametz or patach, like the word nishmar. Nishmar means it's being watched with a kametz. But if it's a patach, it's nishmar. It was watched. Or take another thing. Another example. Nishbar. It was broken. With a kametz, it means present tense. It's being broken right now. And shavur is an adjective. It's not a verb. And nishbar with a patach means it was broken. Okay, so kametz is present tense. Patach is past tense. When the last letter of the shorish is an aleph, like nimtza or nivra, there's no difference between the past tense or the present tense. They're both with a kametz. You can't have a patach there. When the last letter is a hey, the difference is kametz is past tense and segol is present tense, like near and near So in Hebrew they say lo near ali. They say it like a kametz. No, that means it didn't seem to me. You're saying it doesn't seem right now. You say it should lo near If you mean it doesn't look like that right now, it's near And na'aseh is a present tense. Na'asa is the past tense. So it's kind of funny. When hey is the last letter of shoresh, kametz means past. When it's any other letter except for aleph, kametz means present tense. And there's another exception to this. In all those cases where you have a patach, like nishbar, nishmar, past tense, if it's the end of a sentence, it becomes a kametz also. And then you're stuck. Is it present tense or past tense now? The patach gets upgraded. Okay. So the point is anything that had been made to God, so now you can't burn it bachutz. This points out, by the way, we've seen the wars of Isurim Mizbeach. Isurim Mizbeach, the halachas that we saw at the beginning of this book, those are talking about things that cannot be brought to the temple, period. They're disqualified. Isurim Mizbeach, things that not should be brought to the temple. Pesulei HaMikdashim, which we're going to get to next, are things that you could have brought to the temple, but they became disqualified in the temple, like the Rambam just said here. That's why the Rambam divides it. So you're wondering, wow, I was thinking about all the different things that I can't sacrifice, right? So some are at the beginning of the book. The Rambam calls them Yisur Mizbeach. The other ones he calls Psulei Mikdashim. What's the difference? These are forbidden l'chatchila, and these became disqualified. They had been qualified, but something happened to them in the temple, so now they're not. Okay, good. Now we understand that. Anything for which we would be held accountable for burning it as a sacrifice outside the temple. All you have to do is burn a kazayas. That's the threshold of prohibition. That's when you're hit with the prohibition. Less than the kazayas, it's like all achila, by the way, is also a kazayas, right? To fulfill one's obligation to eat something or to get hit with a punishment for eating something wrong. What's the threshold usually? Kazayas, right? Whether he offered the entire sacrifice completely, properly in the temple, and he left over one kazayas of it, which he burned outside the temple. Still hit. Or whether he left all of it within the temple like he was supposed to. Or he grabbed a piece of it and brought it outside. In the first case, he burned everything and saved a kazayas. In this case, he's going to burn the sacrifice where he's supposed to, but he took off a kazayas of it and put it outside. That's a problem. If that thing that was supposed to be brought in the temple, it's just missing a mashu, right? Just a little bit. And if it's just he burned whatever was left, like that little bit that was missing, bachutz, so he'll be exempt from any punishment. He'll be saved. Okay, so in this case, chasar means he didn't do it himself. Chasar means somehow a piece was missing. Okay, I don't know. They lost it. Got cut off somewhere. Who knows? I don't know. Just it disappeared. They say here, nevado nisraf. Okay, I don't know how that would have happened, but somehow or other, chasar means he didn't do it. It means the sacrifice somehow is missing a piece. Okay. This is the 11th or 9th halach according to whichever count. He says, let's give an example. Let's say you have a kometz, or the frankincense from the meal offering, or the entrails, or any burnt offering. It means a kohen's mincha, kohen's meal offering. They don't do a kmitza to it. They don't take off just the kometz and burn it and eat the rest. The entire thing is burnt. And the libations, those are entirely, no one drinks libations ever. Libations are entirely poured on the altar. Somehow some of it's missing. Patur. And let's say it's a log. Remember the Nesachim, there's a minimal volume of a nesech. There's no such thing as a nesech less than a certain amount. So if that somehow some of that wine spilled out of the bottles, now that nesech is chaser. So if he takes that bottle out of the temple and uses it as an offering, where he shouldn't, he won't be hit with the penalty. Why? Make it a korban. Al hashalemu chayav. For the thing that's whole, he's hit with a penalty. Ve'eno chayav al chaser. But he's not penalized for that which is deficient. Hotzio shalem. Let's say he took the bottle of wine, full measure of a nesech. He took it out of the temple, and then somehow some of it spilled outside the temple. V'he'lahu, and then he poured it as a libation. This is a suffix. Doubt, should he be punished? So therefore, we will not give him lashes for such a thing. But wouldn't the lashes save him from the suffix kares? The answer is, if you're suffix kares, you don't need lashes to save you from it. God doesn't give you suffix kares. Okay? Let's say he burned a limb of an animal that didn't even have a kazayis of meat on it. But the bone certainly compensates for that. He'll be hit with he'll be hit with the punishment for burning this outside the temple because it's all connected. Okay, the kazayis is complete. Let's say he's going to burn something that's technically less than a kazayis, but he salts it like he's supposed to salt the sacrifice, but he's doing it outside the temple, and the salt made up for the missing volume. Okay, doubt we don't know if he's to be punished, so we will not punish him. The burnt offering and its entrails. Now, there's no difference between the meat of the burnt offering because it's burned anyways, and its entrails, they will add up to the kazayis also. Next, where are we? So he burned this offering outside the temple, and then he burned it some more. Okay. Instead of normally, what would they do when they did a burnt offering outside the temple? They chop up the animal and they put all the pieces on the pile of wood outside. But let's say they did it slowly. One piece, another piece. Like the Rambam says, learn to give tzedakah. You train kids to give tzedakah to get used to it. Yeah, get every act. Okay, every single limb. Okay, every toe. Well, actually, no. Burnt offerings can't have toes, right? There's no such thing as a burnt offering that has toes, right? Not. It says split hooves. Basically, just has two hooves. Zarak v'he'elah chayav shtayim. Well, birds have you don't dismember the only thing you do they split the bird offering. Remember? Well, yeah, I know, but you're not supposed to take it apart into pieces. Zarak v'he'elah chayav shtayim. Let's say he throws the blood and he burns the offering, so it's two acts of sacrifice. Okay. Sharei halaka katuv bein ma'aleh le'oseh. The pasuk made a difference between ma'aleh, means the actual burning, and the oseh. Now, normally our criticism also, let's talk a little dictic here. In modern Hebrew, unfortunately, they picked this up from Yiddish, which also infected English. Why? Yiddish is its own language, right? Well, it borrows a lot from Hebrew. So in English, we say make aliyah. There's no verb. It's like make is the verb, aliyah. That's an ascension, means to immigrate to Israel. So it's to immigrate, not make aliyah. So that became in Hebrew, instead of la'alot la'aretz, what do they say? La'asot aliyah. And that's the other criticism. So they say, they want to daven. Instead of lit palel, what do they say? La'asot mincha. Instead of laundering clothing, lechabes, what do they say? La'asot kavisa. You have other examples? Everything's la'asot. That's the only verb left. Make, do. Okay? Like in Yiddish and in English. But in all fairness, this does have a precedent in these halachas. It says la'asot korban. Make a sacrifice. La'asot oto. So that's the verb that God used. That verb is generally used to describe a number of acts, sacrificial acts, starting with slaughter, catching the blood, throwing the blood, right? And then there's the actually burning the sacrifice. So that's the one ma'aleh, okay? is a fancy word. Why do they say you don't elevate a sacrifice? It means to burn the sacrifice, make it go up in smoke. So it says Asher Ya'aleh Olah. It says in the verse, a person who would make a burnt offering, V'namar la sototo, okay, to make this sacrifice. So there's a distinction between the verbs. So that's why the Rambam says you could have zrika. That's a form of what's called fall under asiya, make the korban, and he'elah means he elevated the sacrifice. He actually burned it. So those are covered. One is zrika is covered by asiya, and the he'elah, elevating, is covered in the ya'aleh olah. Okay? So two different verbs used in the Torah. So these two actions are covered by two different verbs. So it's two separate prohibitions with two separate liabilities. If he burnt a limb that's actually missing the proper shear, so also he's not hit with the punishment. So he's obligated for that which is whole. And he concludes here, two people do it at the same time. Let's hold on to this limb of the animal, burn it together. Okay, we're still obligated. Ish, any man. That's the expression, every man. Could have said kol ish, or it just says ish asher ya'aleh olah. Afilu ish v'ish elahu chayavim. The fact that it said double, even though it's in idiom expression meaning any, the fact that it didn't have to say that, so it teaches you that if they do it together, they're hit with the prohibition. Unlike, let's say, for example, Shabbos. What do two people do a malacha that only required one person to do on Shabbos? So technically speaking, they're not hit with the punishment for violating Shabbos.
So that's if one does have to work here.
What are you doing? You have to work.
They're both picking it up and they're both putting it in the fire. It's not one picking up and it's the other one putting them down.
Neither are we talking about on Shabbos. We're talking about people carrying something together into the Rosh Hashanah, right? Yeah. So there's apparently the Ravid had a bad girsa of the Rambam here. You read the Ravid, you see that he says that there's something wrong with this, and they point out, yes, the Ravid had a bad version of the Rambam, and he corrects the Rambam to say what the Rambam is actually saying. We'll close with this. Amar Avram, Hasfarim shalanu einam mishavim lazo hagirsa uvadai hi mishubeshet. Our Gemaras don't seem to fit what the Rambam's writing here. He must have a mistake here. No, the Rambam fits the Gemaras. You just have a bad version of the Rambam. Aval girsa shalanu in Zvachim says, after the Rabbi Kiva chayav shtayim. Even Rabbi Kiva says you should be it with two, Zarak and He'elah. Why? Because two different acts. Okay? There's two verbs, sham ta'aleh and sham ta'aseh. You did one act that counts as doing or making the korban, and one of actually elevating it, hit twice. Even Rabbi Kiva agrees to this thing. The Rambam agrees also. Okay? Aval shachat v'zarak l'divrei kol eino chayav al achas. If a person were to slaughter and then throw the blood, one person does it. That's one prohibition. Why? Because slaughtering and throwing the blood are both covered under asiyah. Okay.
So the person wouldn't actually be whipped twice.
Well, sometimes a person would get whipped twice. Yeah, 2 sets. Yeah, but then the estimation would be that we can only take 20 of each, but still it's 2 separate acts.
But I thought if someone is have like several different things, they only given the most severe one.
Kimle derabi, yeah, these are 2 equal prohibitions.
So in the case of equal ones,
He's given both punishments because he's going to get hit with charis twice. So he needs 2 acts of lashes to save him from what he got. So either way, the Ravid's pointing out that certain acts that we can differentiate between, let's say, slaughtering the animal, catching the blood, throwing the blood, those are all considered asiyah. So doing, let's say, even all 3 of those, one prohibition. But then the act of burning the limbs of the animal on the altar, that's a separate verb altogether. And for that, he's hit with the totally separate prohibition. Okay, we'll stop here because it's getting late. Should have to go home, and everybody's calling me. And we pray, once again, see the destruction of Israel's enemies. Shalom, nitzachon. See rebuilding of the temple. It's within our reach. We could actually accomplish this if we would just try. Have a good one. Shabbat shalom.
Invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement. Please email us at office@machonshilo.org.